Hello and welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. My name is Tim Smith. I'll be your host today, and my guest is Dr. Stephanie Wang. Dr. Stephanie Wang is an associate professor and Institute for Entrepreneurship and Competitive Enterprise faculty fellow here in the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship at the Kelley School of Business. Stephanie's primary research interests lie at the intersection of internationalization and social environmental sustainability. She's particularly interested in studying emerging market multinationals and cultural industries as research contexts. Stephanie has won numerous international awards, including the Poets and Quants Best 40 Under 40 Business School Professors in 2022. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me and this wonderful introduction.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'm so excited about our conversation since I have a sustainability expert here with me today.
I'm so excited to join this conversation as well, to share my insights and my research.
Great. Well, a starting point I think it would be a good one for us is let's talk a little bit about sustainability. How about CSR and ESG, corporate social responsibility, environmental social governance, sustainability? What are the difference between these two areas within sustainability?
Yeah, Tim, that is actually a great question. So as you talk about, my own research area is in the intersector of internationalization and ESG sustainability. And over the time, there are a lot of discussion in terms of what is CSR, what is ESG, because they have been used interchangeably, right? Because they are under the same umbrella of sustainability. So, but in my view, there are some differences. So CSR is more, first well known by scholars and practitioners, right? Corporate social responsibility. So to me, it's more about overarching guidance and principles for firms in terms of their decision making, their principles, and then their practices to be environmental and socially responsible. So that is more internally oriented, right? So what is our guiding principle? So I have interviewed CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officers. Guess what? I interviewed a lot of them, and none of them have the same job description. So as you see, right, so this sustainability, including CSR, is relatively new, right? So the whole industry, the whole field is in the nascent, speed of development.
Sure.
So now ESG, environmental social governance, is even more recent, term. So that, but it has something slightly different from CSR because the goal is to quantify firms' efforts, quantify the risks related with ESG and what's their efforts, what they have done. And CSR is very different. So different firms, they might have their different priority, right? So it may have different focus. Well, ESG, the goal is ultimately to provide something more standardized so you can compare firm A with firm B. What's their ESG risks? What are the initiatives they have done? What are the efforts? So particularly today, we're starting to see more and more external ratings like S&P ESG rating. So it's starting to provide a accreditation, rating for firms, for stakeholders to know, particularly investors like suppliers to know what the firms are, what their position, and what the thing people can do to help the firms or to punish the firms if they are not doing well.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that makes total sense. In my own research, and I looked up ESG scoring, it certainly is much higher for companies within Scandinavia, Singapore, and maybe not so high a score for companies within the US. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you're right. So this is something really interesting to me is to study the sustainability and ESG from international business perspective. Because if you look across the globe, so you're right, US, according to the latest global sustainability index, US is ranked number 30. And Sweden, Norway is the top 2, not surprising. And the top 20 countries are all Europe, other than Japan, as you can imagine, and Singapore, and so this is why when we talk about ESG practices, so many European companies and European governments, they are they are more one step before U.S. and U.S. corporations. This is why I always encourage my students and my have discussion among my co-authors, so we can zoom out of the U.S. and then look a little bit broad across different institutions. So looking at firms, particularly multinational firms, because they have stakeholders, in different countries, and they are operating in different institutional environments. So what are the enablers? What are the unique barriers for them to gain this competitive advantage in this ESG space?
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. So tell me about your most recent research. I thought it was fascinating that you were looking very closely at the CSI, right? The index, which is talking about corporate social irresponsibility. So tell us about your recent article.
Thank you for asking, Tim. Yes, we professors, we like to have new terms and new jargons to make it complicated phenomena, even more complicated, right? Yes, so CSI is really corporate social irresponsibility, right? So which is you can consider as opposite side of CSR. Some people also call it CSIR, so corporate irresponsibility, right? So we all know that firms, they can do good things, right? They can engage in positive, influence by engaging in initiatives that help responsibility, but meanwhile they can do harm, right, which is social irresponsibility. So, for our empirical work, sometimes we separate those two concepts because firms, they can be simultaneously good and simultaneously bad, right? So they do good and bad simultaneously.
Sounds like human nature to
exactly,
me. Yeah.
exactly. So for that particular paper, so that is co-authored with our former doctor student, Cassie Liu, and also my colleague here, Dan Li.
Yes.
So the paper basically we look at the governance of sustainability, right? So imagine if we say, okay, so we want ESG to become a new norm for firms. We want everyone to contribute to sustainability. Then we need to have a governance mechanism, reward someone who do well and punish someone who didn't do well. So this is what we call the governance mechanism. So however, the governance mechanism, this is a firm, those are stakeholders who do the governance. However, there's also something in between. So there's intermediaries, right? Who basically spread the information, frame the information, so which is also very important part. So this is our particular focus in that paper. So we look at intermediaries like news, right? News articles.
Sure.
So how do they frame and distribute information? So in particularly, we find that newspaper, right? So news articles, so they might, disclose a firm A, did this bad behavior, right? Sometimes they may also include another firm B. So for instance, in the Deepwater oil spill, right? So we mentioned BP, but they also mentioned Transocean. And they even maybe mention other firms like Haley Bruton. And then similarly, when they talk about the massive cyber attack in eBay back in 2014, they might also mention a recent attack in Target. So some of those are really unintentional. So they just group, firm together in one news article. However, we find this grouping actually has substantive implication for firms, for stakeholders' attribution. So when we talk about attribution theory, right? So we will think about, so what caused this behavior? So is the firm the cause? They are the bad guy, they do this bad thing, right? So then those are internal cause. We should really punish the firm, right? So those are internal causes. So now attribution theory also talk about there might be external reasons like situational causes. They didn't probably do that intentionally. So there are external, reasons, situation, factors that cause that behavior. With that, in that situation, people will say, okay, that's not really your fault. So the punishment turned to be lighter. So now go back to the media, right? So when they disclose multiple firms, irresponsible behavior together, so they created this artificial violator group, which makes people turn to attribute this behavior more externally. So therefore, the punishment is lighter. So we look at S&P 500 stock market reaction, look at the differences, all else being equal, just a little different framing, and then we see substantial differences. And of course, there's boundary conditions, right? So for instance, if a firm who, been consistently bad, right? They've been doing bad things over and over consistently, or if they are doing bad in different contexts, say in country A, country B, country C, or in different incidents, environmental, social, governance, all sorts of incidents. In that case, this will basically weaken this artificial group which leads to external attribution. So the bottom information is really stakeholders, right? So in their governance, their cognitive process, their attribution process is very important. So we need to be aware the potential biases, the intermediaries and news, including other intermediaries or anything in between firms and stakeholder. So that might play a role in this governance. So we need to be aware of this. This biases in
Great.
the
Well,
process.
fascinating. I hope you'll continue to expand on that research. It sounds like a cutting edge area to explore and further provide more knowledge and greater transparency. I think that's a big part of CSV and CSR and ESG, right? The transparency for those of us who are interested in supporting companies with our time and our treasure, right? To be sure that they're going about it the right way and hopefully bringing people along with them, right?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Well, speaking of bringing people along, how about students? I'm curious, what are some thoughts, Stephanie? How could students get more involved in ESG sustainability in a myriad of ways?
Right, yeah. I always tell my students in class, if you haven't figured out a career path yet, this ESG is really promising.
Yes.
Because, if you look at the industry as a whole, ESG is becoming normalized, meaning the society, we stakeholders, we all expect change, right? So we all expect we have to be sustainable in this ESG space. And currently, we couldn't really figure out how, right? So there is a huge demand for talents. So this is why I always encourage my students to get prepared.
Yes.
This will be really, interesting and fulfilling career paths because firms, they are increasingly becomes both purposeful in pursuit for profits, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but that being said, I think ESG, again, the jargon is become, it's helpful in a way that we know this is an ESG issue, but ESG are really different. So when we're thinking about E, right, I think E, environmental, has been talked a lot because climate change, right, is something we can't really see, right? So we know this is, we have to commit to climate change, right, net zero commitment, right, clean energy transition. So all those really important, urgent issue, right? So this is why, but that is really coming from the E perspective, and then S is so different, right? In the U.S. context, it mostly almost like DEI, right? So diversity, equality, inclusion, and community relationship. So and if we look at across the globe, and then S, social, really have different implication, right? So governance itself has always been there. It's about board, how you make transparency, as you talk about, and other responsible behaviors. So, but ESG, they really require different talents, different expertise. So for students, particularly undergraduate students, I think it's important to keep in mind that all the ESGs, they is built on the understanding about operations, right? Build a deeper understanding about businesses, right? So keep an ESG mindset, but you need to first understand how the business operation, how is your supply chain, where is your carbon emission comes from. So what is energy transition implication to you from the business perspective, right? And then build on top of this business operation efficiency, and then always with this ESG mindset, and then you can think about what you can make changes, right? So from the corporate perspective, as we talked about CSO before, so the role of CSO is starting to become more and more important in many companies and in many industries. So CSO starting to report to CEO or CFO or COO, and then within the CSO there are talents contributing to this ESG understanding internally and contributing to externally to the regulators, investors, right, stakeholders, all kinds of stakeholders. So that is very important. So it really requires talents have a more balanced skill sets because you really need to kind of like be the agent or the messenger to connect all the different area, functional area, internally and externally to communicate with stakeholder. So you need to deliver the message what the firm is doing, what firms need some help, because deep down, this sustainability is a shared agenda that
Absolutely.
we, human beings across the globe, we need to do something. We need to work together, so that the role really needs a lot of different types of expertise. Yeah, so this is why I encourage students to engage in study abroad. Right. So as you talk about Europe, right? So go there and experience the different stakeholder environment, and then learn about other countries, other firms, their practices, right? So outside, even in some developing countries, many developing countries, they are leapfrogging in this. They are becoming the new leader in many of the new energy space. And we should really open our mind and then to learn from those firms from different industry, from different institutional contexts.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds like Indiana University's Kelley School of Business is an excellent place for our current students to continue to explore in this area, but also for our future students to come our way and learn from some of the experts who are doing research in this cutting edge and very important area for research. Stephanie, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me.
Absolutely. I look forward to our next discussion.
Same.
Thanks.
Thank you.